Coming to you from Southern California, this is Mindset, mental health news and information. I'm your host, James Curtis. On today's show.
If you were hurt at 6 and you're sitting in my office and you're 56, we really have to go back and look at life as a 6-year-old interprets and experiences it for that particular impact to be healed.
Remember that phrase, get in touch with your inner child? Well, even if the thought of that phrase makes you kind of roll your eyes, I invite you to reconsider. My guest for today's show, that was her voice for our main topic, Atlanta-based licensed professional counselor Denise Houston. I promise you that after hearing this interview, you may want to change your mind about that phrase. Well, okay. You probably will still roll your eyes when you hear it, but you will also finally understand the true value of the approach. But first, this news from the Mindset Report. The Mindset Report online at mindsetreport.com. The Mindset Report, your most comprehensive source for mental health news. From medicalnewstoday.com, scientists have identified a critical function of what they believe to be schizophrenia's Rosetta Stone gene. That is, the gene that could hold the key to decoding all the genes involved in that horrific disease. In a paper published in the journal Science, neuroscientists from the UK's Cardiff University describe having uncovered the previously unknown influence of a gene that ensures healthy brain development. When the gene which is known as DISC1, which is short for disrupted in schizophrenia 1, is prevented from binding with certain other molecules, the ability to form coherent thoughts and to properly perceive the world is damaged as a result. Previous studies have also shown that interrupting the DISC1 binding process is also a high risk factor for other mental illnesses, including major clinical depression and bipolar disorder. In a Colorado courtroom, a jury heard testimony in order to decide whether convicted killer James Holmes should get the death penalty for killing 12 people in an Aurora, Colorado movie theater back in 2012. The last witness was Arlene Holmes, James Holmes' mother. This report, courtesy of NPR News.
Arlene Holmes took the stand, sitting just 10 feet from her son in court. She told the jury he was a kind and thoughtful child.
He never harmed anyone, ever, until July 20th, 2012.
She said he was socially awkward growing up, always did well in school, liked to play video games, maybe a bit too much, but otherwise was normal. She said she still loved him and that he's mentally ill.
Schizophrenia chose him. He didn't choose it. And I still love my son.
After James Holmes failed out of grad school and was dumped by his girlfriend, he told his psychiatrist he wanted to kill people. His mother was asked what she would have done had the psychiatrist told her that.
I would have been crawling on all fours to get to him. He's never said that he wanted to kill people. She didn't tell me.
Prosecutors claim that the defense testimony is simply trying to humanize the now convicted gunman, which is an enormous task given the horrific nature of the crime. For these and other mental health stories, visit the Mindset Report online at mindsetreport.com. Our main topic, adults healing childhood wounds, when we return. Welcome back to Mindset, Mental Health News and Information. I'm your host, James Curtis. Have you ever had this kind of thought about someone you know? I know he's an adult, but sometimes he handles problems like he's 6 years old. Well, according to therapist Denise Houston, not only might you be exactly right, surprisingly, you may have also identified a big part of that person's solution.
I am Denise Houston. I am a licensed professional counselor in a private practice in North Metro Atlanta, Georgia. And I work in my practice with people across the lifespan. I start with preschoolers and see children, adolescents, adults, and seniors in my practice who have been exposed to traumatic experience, adverse experience, loss, life transition, those sorts of things. What I have found across my career is that a lot of adverse or negative, particularly impactful experience happens when we are children. And it has come to my attention that's so much more prevalent than we ever had any idea, or that I ever had any idea in my training and education. And I think that most people have any idea. What I have found in working with people is that you have to go back to the point of where and when that experience occurred because of the developmental level that the child or the person was when it occurred. Is how it was stored. It was how it was experienced. It was how the memory was actually encoded. And so if you were hurt at 6 and you're sitting in my office and you're 56, we really have to go back and look at life as a 6-year-old interprets and experiences it for that particular impact to be healed.
Now, one of the things that occurs to me when I hear you say that is, well, two things actually. One is the thing that, frankly, I and other people that I was around at the time used to make fun of, and it still brings to mind that idea of get in touch with your inner child. Now, before you respond to that, a lot of people, myself included, not being a mental health professional, react to that kind of idea like, really? Get in touch with my inner child. I'm 56 years old. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that many people are sort of disdainful or that they diminish the impact or they feel like it's actually, I guess, an indulgence, to go back and look at those early years, that you're sort of indulging yourself by going back and revisiting that experience instead of being this sort of rugged individual adult that just sort of, takes things head on and tackles things with this overt force. And I think it just comes from a lack of understanding about how we turn into adults. James, I think actually rather than it being indulgent, I think it's actually quite brave and quite responsible. When we find ourselves as adults in a pattern of behavior that is disturbing to us, whether it's being married and divorced multiple times, whether it's a series of job losses, whether it is a poor relationship with our body, as in how we eat or how we take care of ourselves, when we present somewhere and we say, this is a problem, and I would really like to change this, it has impacted my life so profoundly and given me these consequences I'm really no longer willing to live with. When they present that way and we go back and look at how their perception of themselves formed in the world, how their relationships formed in the world, you often go back to some adverse experience that occurred in childhood or adolescence that set a template for what I have come to believe about myself or myself in relationship with others that really warrants reevaluation and resolution. I don't see that as indulgent. I think that that is responsible. And I think we would all live in a better, more peaceful, less violent, less disruptive world if people had more access and understanding and willingness to tackle those things.
So, do you use that phrase? Because it does bring to mind, it makes me shudder a bit and I'm not sure why. Maybe I need therapy to figure that out. But it does bring to mind sort of that, as you put it, disdainful, minimizing, disparaging sort of, really give me a break. I'm a grown person. I don't. Can we change the phrasing? Do you use that phrase? Get in touch with your inner child, or does anybody use that anymore?
I really
Is that
don't,
antiquated?
I don't use it, James, because I find people responding just like what you describe.
Okay.
And it puts distance immediately, between me and my client. I'm very goal-oriented, so I typically just ask you, what is it you're wanting? When you come into therapy, what is it you're wanting? And most people who show up in my office, they either name an adverse experience, they've had a car accident and now they are terrified, to get back in the car. Or, again, they are having interpersonal relationship issues and they can't quite figure out how they keep attracting the same person, but they have a different face. So I engage people from the get-go with what is it you are wanting to be different. And then we look at the pattern for how they are going about that. How did it get set up to be that way? I can certainly give them coping skills for how to manage in the moment. How there's communication skills, there's assertiveness skills, but I have found all that does not truly eliminate the pattern, James, if there is some underlying unresolved adverse experience that keeps rising up, keeps a pattern in place that is dysfunctional. And so my recommendation and the way that I treat people or work with people is let's go back and see, where did you learn to feel this way? Where did you learn to believe it's true that love means being hurt, or that, authority is dangerous, or... So I engage people by what they are wanting, and then we go back and look for where they learned to operate in such a way that it is not in their best interest.
And it just so happens that when you drill down to where that started, where we acquired the habit or the taste or the pattern or became accustomed to whatever that source is, it typically does go back to when we were young.
It does. It does. And again, I think most people underestimate the prevalence of child abuse and neglect, the impact of especially a high conflict divorce, James. If I am 7 and sort of rocking and rolling along in my world, okay, and then all of a sudden it is completely disrupted. Everything I have come to rely on and believe to be true is jerked right out from under me. All of a sudden people are just at each other's throats. I am being dragged, from one place to another. School is changing. Friends are changing. My parents, when they exchange me, they're screaming at each other or yelling at each other or threatening each other. That has a profound impact on my developing sense of self and my understanding of how relationships work.
And that sounds like some of the marriages that I've seen where they stay together in terms of how they relate to one another.
That equally has an impact because, James, children are always learning. They are always learning. They learn through repetition. And so, what I tell people or what we talk about is, what were you learning? Every day in your world, in your relationships, in your experience of yourself, what were you learning? Were you learning you could trust people or you could not trust people? Were you learning you could trust yourself? Or were you learning that you could not trust your perceptions of both your own experience and what was going on in your world? Were you learning that you were safe in the world or not safe in the world? Because if you learn that you're not safe in the world, you are going to constantly be scrambling for safety to create that for yourself. Were you learning about how your body works, how your body supports you or doesn't? And so those beliefs about the world and then, all the feelings that go along with that don't just disappear because you don't express them. There can be tremendous anger or rage or grief or shame that gets piled up from some of that adverse experience or negative experience, especially when, one is being hurt by someone that is responsible for one's caregiving. So all that